was really disappointed, and I wrote a note that said, I will be King Mufasa in the Lion King, Lyceum West End. I wrote the year for the next year. I remember years ago I read a book by Sidney Poitier, one of my favorite actors. He wrote a book called Measure of a Man. There's a quote in the book that I actually have on my website that says, acting isn't a game of pretend, it's an exercise in being real.
Welcome back to the Alex Witherow Show. Today I have a very special guest, Bueka Uwemedimo. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Awesome. That's a tough one and a mouthful. He is a West End actor. He's also toured the UK and regional theater throughout the United States. He's an entrepreneur as well as an educator. Bueka, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Thank you.
So let's jump in. You and I have a very similar background. I was a professional actor for 15 years. You've been doing this for a long time as well. Mm-hmm. What I'm excited about today is that we can really talk shop about the industry, the craft, the history of it all. We're going to dive in big time today. So
Let's do it.
You are a West End actor. Now, if people may not know what that means exactly, that is London's version of Broadway.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Yes.
And you were in Lionking on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about what that was like. I mean, I know that I never did Broadway as a theater actor. I did off Broadway, but I've seen your resume. It's a very high class resume.
Thank you.
I have like a B- theater resume. You have like an A theater resume.
Thank you, man.
Mine wasn't too bad, but it was. But yours is awesome though.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Lots of years of putting in the time, as they say.
Of course,
right?
of course. So tell me, what was it like when you first got the call that you were going to the West End, doing Lion King, obviously a famous show, probably the most popular franchise of ever. I can't think of anything that would be bigger than the Lion King. Talk to me about what was your role in it? What was that first call from your agent like, and then how did your life change after that?
Yeah, I mean thank you. That was a pretty incredible experience. So for me to even explain that, I would have to go a little bit backwards and just go back in time into my history. So, I'm originally from Nigeria. I was born and raised in Lagos, and my family, my mum and sister moved to the UK when we were like 6 years old. So for me, when we went to my first experience in the theater was actually my drama teacher. I took drama for the first time in school, and I absolutely loved it. It was just the idea of imagination, make believe. You could really be anything you want to be in that space. You could really be free to create. And I went to a theater show, part of our drama class when I was in school. We went to a theater show called An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. Great story. And I mean, you can imagine from someone, a young boy is coming from Nigeria. I've never seen theater. I've never seen anything like this. I was just absolutely blown away by the costumes, the music. It was just like going into a completely new world. And the storyline was so gripping. It just really gripped me. And for anyone that hasn't seen An Inspector Calls, it's an amazing play, basically centered around a maid that unfortunately takes her life, and this mysterious inspector shows up at the people's home where the maid worked. It was a wealthy family, and he starts to interview them, but he has this sort of otherworldly presence. Like, he seems to know things about them that naturally he shouldn't know. So at the end of the play, they die. When he leaves, people are wondering, well, who was he? And we're gonna call his inspector and the chief constable and find out who this person is. And when they call, they find out that this person actually never really existed. This inspector is, it's a great story. Anyway, I say all of that to say, that's where my initial love for the arts really came in. I was proud to say that through school I got an A-star in drama. My drama teacher, Ms. Barry, wherever she is out in the world, she was really encouraging. I went to a school called Crofton Park High School. And Ms. Barry was extremely encouraging. And from that, when I went to college, I actually studied business and finance in college. But interestingly enough, I wanted to go to the Brits, which is a performing arts school. But again, just going through my background, I think sometimes as for most Nigerians who will probably see this interview, I usually joke that we're ever really given four. If you go to school, you're ever really given four things that you're allowed to do. And that's become an engineer, business, doctor, or So it's the options are very limited. So.
Right. Being an actor in a Nigerian family is probably like being an actor in a Chinese family.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, just to let you know, it doesn't go over great in a white family either. I'll tell you, my parents didn't love it either. So go on.
So for me, it was I wanted to go to the Brits, but I ended up doing business and finance because you always want to have the idea of having something that feels stable and something you can fall back on. But even when I was in college, I would often ask my friends who were doing, in the same classes, what do you guys want to do after this? What's the plans? And most people didn't really seem to have a plan. And, when we would have, events at school, at college, I was part of a boy band, so we would end up performing. And so there was always that, for me, there was always that love, that passion within the arts that was there. When I finished college, I ended up getting into real estate. I was working for a company, renting homes. And a good friend of mine who was actually a dancer at the time was like, there's a Motown audition. I think you'd be good for it, man. Because you used to remember I was, we were part of the boy band and we used to sing in college. So she was like, I think you should audition for it. So I went in for the audition. I ended up doing I can't get no satisfaction by Otis Redding, the classic, so I ended up singing that. And, mind you, without having done anything like this, apart from, being in college, they liked it. The producer liked it. It was like, man, yeah, I like it. I booked the job.
Right. And you just walk right in and
literally walked right in. Yeah, literally walked right in. And,
that's blessed, man.
Literally, yeah. And that's how my career started in it. That particular show toured for like 6 months. The first one I did, we toured across Europe. Literally like the Motown tour, like how Motown toured back in the day, but in Europe. We went to from Newcastle, Manchester, Birmingham. We went to Sweden, Spain, Barcelona. It was amazing. I mean, that just right off coming out of college, working for a little while, and then going into that, and just that experience was incredible. I look back on a lot of those experiences, and it was very fond years. I mean, just being able to experience what we did, having those first stage jitters that you have, the first time we actually got on stage after weeks of rehearsing, to actually perform in front of a live crowd, for me, that was a surreal feeling.
So let's back this up a little. Okay, I'm like hearing this and I'm like, okay, you were working in a corporate desk job.
Yes.
And then you just rolled in one day. Now, did you have any theatrical training at this point? Had you done any shows before?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Wow.
It was. I always say it like this, and I understand that everyone's experience is different. I really do feel like I didn't find it; it found me.
Yeah.
And
that happens. Yeah. I mean, if you've read Greenlight's Matthew McConaughey's book, I mean, it definitely found him.
Yeah. It definitely found me, and it was something that, in the most purest form of expression, is something I felt very at home being on stage.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing because, on the one hand, I remember even going further back to being in primary school, I was super shy. I was a super shy kid. I didn't, as far as when it came to like dating and girls and all of this stuff, people were like, oh, you're cute, and now, get super shy. But then I had this alternative personality where I would stand up and tell my friends stories when I was in primary school. I would get up and make up these stories right off the top of my head, just create these stories. And I remember that experience even from primary school, and to the point where, the kids during playtime would come and gather around, and I would literally be standing there making up stories about something funny or something hilarious. And, the ones that had to go back in class when my year was coming out would be disappointed, like, oh man, Bueka's coming out, I want to hear the story, So I feel like there was always something within me in that sense that was always creative in that way. So
sure.
It felt very natural when I booked this show, and it took time to sort of get into the experience of performing back to back. And I did that for many years, and that was mostly touring. I had never done the West End. The West End, for as most people know with Broadway, is like the holy grail.
Right.
And so for someone like myself who had never, been on the West End, who hadn't had professional training in that perspective, I booked an agent who had seen me perform at a couple of places, and he was like, I think you got a really great potential. I think there's we just have to get you in front of the right people to see you, to hear your talent.
And let me ask you this. So you went on Motown's tour around Europe.
Yeah.
How old were you at this point? 23, 24?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was around 23, okay. 24. Yeah.
So you're on Motown. You finish Motown, and then is that when you found the agent?
Yes.
All right,
yes,
that makes
yes.
sense.
Yeah.
So how was it going through the rehearsal process? I mean, I know just as a former actor, first day of school, open read, it feels like it feels like it's a little nerve wracking when you first get there.
It is.
You're being sized up a little on the open read. If you suck, they might fire you. Like that's the time to not suck because they could fire you on that first day.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of there's jitters in the room, but it's exciting too because you're meeting the cast. Obviously, like I love when I do a show because like that cast is going to become your like family over the next few months. And as you know, theater people are quite a hoot.
Yes.
Lots of personality.
Lots of personalities for sure.
Lots of personalities. So, how was it in that rehearsal process on Motown? How was it when you first started?
The first. I remember the first day we came to a studio in Chelsea, and where I met who would then be my castmates. One of them, his name's Wayne Anthony Cole, became a dear friend of mine. I've known him now for over 25 years. Shout out to Wayne. It's like a brother of mine now, and we, and for me, that's one of the things I really love, like just getting to meet these people for the first time, and just that experience. So initially we went through the breakdown of the history of Motown, and then sort of then would have vocal lessons, in terms of working out the songs. And I would say for myself, I was always very enthusiastic. I'd always been, it's like, man, this is something I've always dreamt of, right? From back in when I was in school and I'd gone to my first theater play. So here I am in this space, and I think I was an overachiever. I wanted to make sure I knew all the songs. So part of my role within the show, I played David Ruffins, as the lead vocalist in the Temptation section of the show. I also hosted the show with another gentleman, so we were like the show's host as well. So we would introduce the other castmates on as we were doing the show and make banter and jokes between us. So yeah, for me, I really wanted to just make sure that this was something I was very passionate about. It wasn't a joke for me. So it's funny because I remember the producer would say, man, you are going hard, as in like you are singing at full belt. It's okay, we know that you can sing, this is rehearsal. But for me, it was just like, nah, like every time I would get on, even in rehearsal, I guess I was just like, this is something I've always dreamt about. So sure. I want to do my best. Yeah. I want to absolutely, So just that overall experience was just amazing. Like just getting to know everyone. I would say over time, it's, especially as I haven't been in the business for a long time, and obviously we get into the Lion King stuff. I think some of the experiences I learned from that, especially when you tour, as you say, it's our industry is 5 to 9, as opposed to 9 to 5. Relationships, friendships can grow very quickly, but I always advise, people who are trying to get into our industry to take your time. Take your time, really get to know people. Relationships do evolve very quickly, and I think sometimes if you don't have a fair balance as far as the way you're coming into the business and how you carry yourself around other people, wires can get crossed very quickly, you know, and in our case, you know, though the over experience was amazing, there were times where I think the level of over familiarity, especially as you're touring you're on the same tour bus, you're not really getting a lot of space to yourself and time. I think how you carry yourself is very important in this business. It's a very small industry. In the UK, a lot of people know each other.
That's the impression I've always had about English acting and the business over there. It's very theater centric.
It is.
Way more than America is. In America, like, I mean, there's so much history in theater in England, right? I mean, the GOAT himself, Shakespeare, is from there. That goes back centuries, right? The Globe Theater has been around forever. And I think it's a really. I have a few friends that have gone over there and trained over there, and they've loved it. They've had a great time, great experience in the UK as an actor. Whereas in America, it's a little more complicated. You have New York, you have LA, you now have Atlanta. I've been in all three of those markets as an actor. It's definitely, and I think there is a big pull for everyone. Most actors are very allured by the TV and film industry.
Yeah.
Whereas theater is not perceived as sexy, so to speak. I always loved theater.
Yeah.
I always felt at home in theater. I'm a big, tall guy. I do not fit well on TV sets. Like, just never did. That was always my problem with TV. But
I'm sure you and Dwayne Johnson would have the same sentiments.
Yeah. I mean, but his size is always being used as, you know, something that is making a statement in the story.
Right.
Unless that's going on, it's a problem.
Right.
But I mean, whenever I walked into a theater audition, they're like, "Oh yes, here's some presents." Right. So talk to me about when you got back from Motown and signed with an agent.
Yeah.
How was that experience? I mean, I know when I signed with my first agent, I've always said that having an agent is like having a girlfriend. Usually either you or her breaks up with you after 2 years. Right. And it's, you know, it's always the question, what have you done for me lately?
Yes.
So talk to me about, I remember my first agent, very interesting experience to say the least. Tell me about what that was like, and then how you kind of started navigating auditions in London.
In London, yes. So, you know, same thing. I think as they say, you have to kiss a few frogs before you find your prince or princess charming. You know, for me, before I actually got with my main agent, again, who ended up becoming a dear friend of mine, still is to this day. Big shout out to Dan Locke, you know, FLP. You know, appreciate you, man. I'd met a few other agents who had expressed interest, you know, because again, with the Motown thing, we were getting a lot of press, you know, in the UK, and a lot of interest and eyes. And by the time we finished the first tour, by the time we finished the third one, because after we finished the first 6 months, we then got another contract. And so by the time I finished, I was seasoned, man. I mean, just like you say, I think most people gravitate towards TV and film, but the theater is, I call it like, that's your training ground.
Yeah.
Like
it's harder.
It's harder.
It's harder.
It is.
It's much harder.
And you are constantly, you got to be on. There's a connection with the audience that you just can't get from film. Film is very rigid. There's just this freedom that you get on stage, and how you can continue to build on a character and learn new things about the character that you can express vocally or through performance. So, you know, for me, I mean, I think of the history of Motown, right? And what it represented. And so when I initially got into the show, they give us the history about it, what it represented, what it meant. But for me, especially as I started to play specific characters or look into the history of Motown and look into things like segregation and what the music meant to a lot of these artists, you know, for a lot of them, this was their lifeline. This was their opportunity to, you know, make good on promises to their family, to really express themselves. I, in a sense, coming from my background, having grown up in Nigeria, moving to the UK with my mum and my sister, not coming from much, I could really sort of put myself in that scenario where I was like not having much and coming and having these experiences, just similar to what a lot of these artists went through. What does it mean? What did it mean for, Marvin Gaye, for example, who, I always say he's my claim to fame in the sense of we're born on the same day, April 2nd. What did it mean for Marvin Gaye to get on that stage, or for a lot of these artists to get on the stage, but knowing that when they finished, they had to go eat at the back. They didn't even have a seat at the table with the people they were performing for. And what did it mean to be able to sing some of these songs? And for me, I recollect some of these things, and to me, they're like my badge of honor because I think of everything I've been through. There were times where by the time I'd finished by the time I had got enough season training in the Motown shows, there were some shows I would be called to perform as a special guest. And the truth is, I would have my suit, but sometimes my suit would have a little hole in it. I would have little holes in my shoe. Mm-hmm. No one would know, but because that's most people think of just the glamorous side of the business.
Right.
Well, you're going to make a ton of money, but the truth is we didn't. We weren't making a lot of money. It's
not that much money.
Not much money at all. It was something that you got to be passionate about. And so for me, there was always this idea of the discoveries really came from the music, the words really mean something. Every time I would perform, I would really kind of think about those words and what those artists were going through at that time and really relate back to myself, and I think I was able to sort of transmute that into other things that I did on stage, when it came to then performing and acting beyond just musicals, is really being able to go deep into what the mind of the person is going through, the playwright, but also the actor. What message are they trying to convey? What were their experiences in that moment? And as I approached it in that way, I felt that I was able to really go deeper, in the words. I remember, one of the songs we used to do was, as Otis Redding, as David Ruffin was My Girl. Mm-hmm. And, it's, again, I would just think of those moments. What does that song actually mean? Where was he at? What was his mind state? The songwriter.
Yeah.
Where were they at when they wrote this? Mm-hmm. I remember Stevie Wonder. I love Stevie Wonder, and I never played the Stevie Wonder, but I would listen to a lot of his songs, and there's just certain moments within the words that, within some of the songs that he wrote and sang that I really felt like I could resonate to those stories.
I would say, and I totally understand what you're saying, it's almost as if the spirit of that person, that role, finds you. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating how that works. Yeah. As someone who's definitely had that experience as well. And I would say that it's almost as if, you have this experience, like you said, where you are continually learning more and more about this person and role as you do it umpteen times. Yeah. And you keep finding, oh, that's what they meant about that, or that's what they meant about that. Yeah. So that's, I totally understand what you're saying. And I think that's a really kind of fun, that's what makes the process so fun, is that when you keep doing that role every night, you're finding these new things, these new moments in the role. Yeah. So when you got back to London, and so you had never really done the audition process. No. So this is like a new thing. Yeah. Which and I think that it's fascinating because I would watch someone in acting school do amazing scene work. And then they just implode in the audition room. Yes. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Auditioning is a different art form. It's a totally different thing. It is. It's a completely different thing. And I always felt that auditioning for theater was a little more similar to the actual act of performing on stage. Yeah. Whereas I feel like auditioning for TV or for film it's a very complicated and different beast. And even to this day, I don't know what I would tell a young actor, if there's any way to crack the code because it's challenging. And you know, when you're doing smaller roles like on TV, you can't bring your Al Pacino performance because you know they're like, no, we save that for the stars. You're just plugging in a little hole right here for you know, one line. So you can't. So talk to me about when you first went out auditioning in London. Like, what was that like?
You know, it's funny. The first major audition I went for was the Lion King. In the West End.
So you come back from Motown and then you book Lion King.
Book the Lion King.
Dude. This really is a Matthew McConaughey story.
No, literally. The first West End major. I mean, okay, it's not like I hadn't gone for other smaller things, because when I got my agent, Dan, so I met Dan, great guy. He was auditioning different singers because the business he runs is part of like cruise ships. Yeah. So I went in and auditioned to be a guest singer on one of the cruise ship businesses that he runs, him and his partners. And he was like, mate, honestly, and I did some of the cruise ships. You know, I was invited as a guest to perform on different cruises.
Those are great gigs.
Yeah.
They pay. That's probably the best paying musical theater gig out there.
Yeah. And I did some of those, but you know, he was like, mate, honestly, you have, you know, star potential, man. I feel like this is just supplemental. I think you are someone that can easily be on the West End. And I think you are someone that can actually be on, you know, the Lion King's coming up. I can see you as Mufasa, man. You know, I was his exact.
You're like, how did that hit you?
Yeah, I was like, man, I mean, I was like, okay, you know, this is the biggest show in the West End. Yeah.
It's the biggest show on Broadway, too. On
Broadway. Yeah. Every year. I always say it like this. My experience even with that was, I would say with the Lion King, everyone in their mama are trying to get on that show because they audition every year. It's literally like a scene out of X Factor or one of these, you know, America's Got Talent, Brits Got Talent.
Right.
Because everyone shows up. You know, everyone turns up. And so when I went for the audition the audition actually spanned all of 3 months. You know, you're talking going back and forth for 3 months, and they want to see how you sound. They want to hear how you carry yourself. They want to pair you with other people and get an idea of, like, you know, your
chemistry.
Your chemistry. Yeah. So for 3 months, I met a lot of people. Even when I first started going, I met people that would say, yeah, this is my 5th time coming to this audition.
So it's like a rolling, ongoing audition.
Ongoing thing. And every year, even though most of the cast never left, but they would always...
They're trying to backfill.
Yeah, make sure...
In case somebody leaves.
Yeah, in case someone leaves. And so I met people that were saying, yeah, this is my 5th year auditioning, and I haven't booked it.
Fifth year?
Yeah, this is my 5th. This is my 5th year coming in.
God.
This is my 3rd year coming in, and I'm like, wow, like this is intense, you know. People, and little by little, as the months, you know, as the weeks went by, the lines and the people I was meeting during these auditions were getting smaller and smaller. You know, they just kept calling me back, and you know, the intention was that, yeah, we want you as Mufasa. You know, that's the role that we want you for. That's the role my agent had submitted me for. And so, like you said, they checked for chemistry and all that good stuff. And for me, I'm a firm believer in the law of attraction. I believe that if you want something, you gotta speak it, you gotta believe it. Unfortunately, the gentleman that was playing Mufasa at the time decided to renew his contract. So when I got to the final audition for that, in that first year, they were like, you know, they told my agent, we really like Bueka, but unfortunately we can't give him the contract because the current Mufasa has renewed his contract. Yeah. So I was gutted, but I ended up going home. I was really disappointed, and I wrote a note that said, I will be King Mufasa in the Lion King, Lyceum West End. And I wrote the year for the next year. Because since I know that this was an ongoing thing, and you know, my agent was like, "Nah, they really liked you," and I remember sticking this on my, you know, putting it up in my bedroom, and I just kept it there, and carried on going as normal.
Did they keep auditioning you?
They called me back the next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after 3 months, I mean, once the audition process is done, they were like, we want to keep him on file. So, and I'm recollecting that there are other people who I'd met who said, this is my 5th time, this is my 6th time, this is my 3rd year, my 3rd year coming in to do this. When the next year rolled around, they called my agent again. Mind you, I had gone back to the cruise ship work, gone back to performing, doing other shows. Situations for me financially around that time was a little different. I was kind of working for myself. I had a van, so I was sort of delivering packages all across London for UPS and different postal companies at the time, but it was like sort of my own thing. So the time I had the first time, the amount of time I had in the first round of auditions that I did the year before, I didn't have that same time. I didn't have that same opportunity. So when my agent called, when Dan called, he was like, yeah, they want to see you again. And I said, listen, I am not in a position to go back and forth like I did the last time. And he was like, man, they really like you. I think you should go. It's going to make a great report. But I was like, I literally cannot do that. Is there a way to speak to them to find out if, because I just didn't want, I didn't have the time to go through the cattle call like I did the first time. Like I said, it was a span of 3 months. And
are they calling you in pretty regularly?
Oh yeah. They're calling you in regularly. You're having to, you're working on the lines, and so I said, can you speak to them? And so he did, and they were like, let him come in. They were like, fine, let him come in during the further stages, towards the end of because we've already seen him before, and
right.
Considering his situation, we actually like him. Let's see him a little bit later, so he doesn't have to do all of the initial cattle call. So I, during my time while I'm driving all up and down London, I'm working on my lines.
I was gonna say you're a great time to memorize lines.
Yeah, I'm memorizing my lines. I'm singing the songs.
Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. So, I'm doing all of this stuff, and I remember I went in. I think I went in all of like 3 times is when I went in, and so as opposed to the first time that I think it was like 13 times or 14 times.
Yeah.
So when I went on the last day I went in, I took off my work shirt, parked my van, I went in and I read the line, I did the song, I did my chemistry with the main lead actress, and I left. But when I got back in my van, I was like, man, I don't know if I did enough. I just didn't get a sense that I had the same rapport, energy that I had from the first time. There was clearly other people they've been seeing a lot more than they'd seen, and so I was really feeling that as I was driving, getting back to work. And funniest story, man. So I'm in the West End, I'm driving, I'm trying to finish up my delivery packages. I get to a red light, and when I get to this red light, another SUV pulls out from Knightsbridge. I was around Knightsbridge area. An SUV pulls out, and I'm in my van, and I look across the road at this SUV. I look at the passenger in the SUV, and I'm like, wait, nah. I look, and it's James Earl Jones.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Mufasa himself, the original,
the OG,
yeah. Mr. Darth Vader, and may he rest in peace. So I look, I'm like, nah. So I wind up my window excitedly, and I'm like, Mr. Jones. So he's looking around like, who's calling my name? And I'm like, Mr. Jones. So he looks towards me. I look at him, and I said, I'm auditioning for Mufasa, right?
He's like, shut up, kid.
Right. in a busy, West End traffic. I said, I'm auditioning for Mufasa. And he goes, he has this, and his voice really carries, man. Like
that's the voice.
That's the voice, man. He bellows out, it just has this deep bellow laugh.
Yeah.
And he goes, "You're gonna get it."
Wow.
Just like that. He goes, "You're gonna get it." And the light turns green. He drives the SUV drives off. And I literally called my agent. I'm like, Dan, you're not going to believe this, mate. I'm like, you won't believe who I just saw at the traffic lights. After I just finished the audition, I said, I literally just saw James Earl Jones. I told him. He said, nah. If that's not like, if that's not like some sort of like alignment with the stars, and
Yeah.
he doesn't know them. It's not like he then called them and said, "Oh, some random guy," you know. But you know
The mail delivery man that just yelled at me. Please cast him.
Please cast him. So that's not what happened. You know, I actually found out later that he was in town doing Driving Miss Daisy.
Oh, interesting.
In another, you know, he was in town in the West End doing Driving Miss Daisy. That's why he was staying at a hotel in Knightsbridge and he was off to work. And literally the next day, man, they called.
The next day?
The next day. They
Wow.
called and told, my agent called, you know, Dan called me, he said, mate, he said, nah, man, you're not going to believe it, man. They said you got the job.
Wow.
They said, we like
Amazing.
him. We want him as Mufasa. So,
And that's a major role
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Lion King.
yeah.
It's not just like, you know, dancer number 3 with the torch.
Yeah, with
you
this,
know?
exactly. exactly.
You know, so that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So this, so I guess from the time you got back from Motown and you started this audition process with Lion King, was this how much time had passed? Like 4 or 5 months?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 4 or 5 months. So just to give you a perspective on it, I auditioned the first year, and the gentleman who was playing Mufasa at the time decided to stay, so they renewed his contract. But they called me for the second year, so it's the second time that I went in.
Yeah.
That I ended up, you know. So yeah, so from Motown to when I actually ended up auditioning the first time for the Lion King was about 4 or 5 months, and then when I finally booked it the year after, it was surreal, man. I mean, when I even went to see the show for the first time, it was, I feel like everything had gone through, you know, come around 360 from my days being in school and going to see my first West End play and Inspector Calls, just seeing the level of artistry that was just there, the detail that goes into the costume, like even as an audience, seeing the revolving, you know, for anyone that hasn't seen The Lion King, you know, they have a revolving stage that comes up, you know, in the initial opening scene with Mufasa and baby Simba, and
No, it's a whole
Yeah.
production. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a huge thing.
Yeah.
What was a show? And I'll tell you my show. There were 2 shows I saw. Tell me your show that really hit you initially when you were younger.
Yeah.
That said, "Oh, I got to do this." Did you have that moment?
I think yes, and I have to be in this space. I would definitely say it was an Inspector Calls.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I mean, when I think of anything that really sort of captivated me right from and mind you, you know, this is the first play I'd ever seen coming from Nigeria, you know, where I hadn't seen anything like this. To this level of, you know, to that level, I hadn't seen anything like that.
Yeah,
So
for me, it was my mom took me on a New York trip when I was 14 years old, and we saw Sunset Boulevard on Broadway, that was starred at the time with Glenn Close.
Wow.
And then I think about a year later, I saw Phantom of the Opera in London on West End, and I love Phantom of the Opera. I have that. The Phantom has always been my dream role. He's kind of a crazy wild man, but he just demands excellence and likes this girl a lot. But yeah, I mean that those 2 shows really kind of kickstarted it for me, for sure.
Yes.
So you did Lion King. How long were you in Lion King?
So I was in The Lion King for 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was in The Lion King for 4 years.
So you had a tight grasp on Mufasa for a while.
I did. It was just, talking of, as they say in these situations, I think once, again, and this just goes out to anyone that's interested in this space, there's a level of professionality and the show must go on. I remember my first ever performance, once I had gone through the rehearsals, they had to create the mask, the lion's mask, Mufasa's head, and essentially they pin it. They get your head size and head shape, and they have to kind of create it to fit your head. And there's a part of the mask that also comes down, and it's pretty cool stuff. My first ever stage, went through the rehearsals, debut. I come on the stage, make my way down, and the helmet literally tumbles off my head.
Tumbles off.
Yeah, falls off and falls into the bandstand.
Into the orchestra?
Into the orchestra. So, all you hear...
You're like, no, I need that.
So,
oh my gosh.
And it's silent.
Did the conductor toss it back up to you?
He did. All you hear is bong, bong, bong,
it hit drums on the way down?
Yeah, hit drums on the way, cymbals.
That's so theater.
And I'm
that is such a theater story.
And I'm standing there, and in my head, I'm like, I'm not gonna say what was really in my head, But I was like, everything the light touches, it's you got to do it. I know my helmet is falling off. You know my helmet is falling off my head, the mask, but the show must go on. You just. You roll it through. So that's my...
the old joke in New York is that the props and costumes are conspiring against you. Yeah. If anything can go wrong with anything, it will go wrong. That's all that is. If I had a nickel for every time something like that happened in theater, it happens all the time.
All the time. Oh,
so you were in that show for 4 years. Why'd you stop?
So I ended up moving stateside. I kind of felt like at the time, after 4 years, great experience. My agent was in the process of trying to get me more TV work. He was looking to line me up with.
He wants that paycheck.
Yeah, it was like, listen, man, there's an evolution. A lot of people are seeing you now, and I think you are definitely ready for us to get you on camera, get you more TV work. There's a lot of your peers who are in doing the same thing. Some great actors that I know in the space that are doing amazing. And so for me, I think there was always an aspect I love theater. I think it's completely different beasts.
Yeah, totally.
I wanted to continue to expand on my experiences, and I knew that I had an opportunity to come to the States and really expand on that. Mm-hmm. Really get a chance to be seen in a bigger space, bring my experiences with me. So I moved. I moved to the States, and that was, I would say, 13 years ago now.
So at this point, when you moved to the States, you're in your late 20s?
Yes. I was in my late 20s, and I was ready to sort of take on the challenges here.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's a reset. I always feel, irrespective, that was I think even with all of that experience I gained, I always say it like this: you're only as good as the last thing you've done. That's why you always have to be professional. You can't, as much as I appreciate the accolades, and you said, you have a very impressive resume. I am humbled in the sense that I know that I've done some amazing stuff, but those things don't define where I'm trying to go, the next projects I want to do, the way I need to carry myself in the room, to directors, to producers. And so when I moved, it literally was a reset. I'd come from the West End, and I was pretty much back in the catacomb, when I moved here. And
then you learned about New York EPAs.
Yes.
And that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, man. That was, oh my gosh.
So for our audience members that don't know what an EPA is, that is an equity principal audition, which is the original cattle call in New York.
Yes, it is.
Now, at this point, fortunately, what's challenging about EPAs in New York is that I would think when you came to, so let me ask you, because we have the union system in America.
Yeah.
There's SAG and there's equity, Actors Equity. Were you able to, and I assume you were in the English union when you were there.
I was, yes.
Was that transferable to America to get into equity?
No.
Okay.
In my experience, it wasn't. I mean, it could have been. I was in equity. I wasn't in SAG because I hadn't done any TV work in the UK. So that whole process was very interesting because, again, like you said, once you get in that space, I was going into audition for West End for Broadway, but I was being looked at for a lot of regional things.
Mm-hmm. In the UK?
In the US.
In the US,
In the
okay.
US, yeah, regional tours.
Right.
And my situation, I wasn't initially based in New York. I was actually based in Maryland.
Okay.
In DC mostly.
Also a great theater scene.
Great
That's
theater
where I
scene.
started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so I was based in DC, and my goal and intention was to get on Broadway, in New York. So I would get on a bus.
The old Bolt bus.
Yeah, the old boat bus, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd get on a bus from Baltimore. I'll drive to Baltimore, get on the bus, go in for the EPAs for TV and film.
So did you have to do the line? Did you have to wait the whole line?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you weren't, because like,
Yeah.
if you're in equity and you have an agent, they usually will get you an appointment.
Yeah.
But
I hadn't got an agent yet in the US. Yeah.
So oh man, that's like,
yeah, I was back to,
man, you like raw dogged Broadway, man. That is a hard path.
yeah. I literally,
That is a hard path
Yeah.
because you gotta, just to put this into perspective for people who don't understand, like, I mean, there are lines around the block on 6th Avenue in New York City they're out there by 5 a.m. Every morning.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to get seen to sing a song. And it takes about 4 hours every day. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, I don't know if I have to be on Broadway that bad.
much. Yeah.
And you'll find out fast
Yeah.
if you're cut out for that or not.
Or not. Yeah, absolutely. And that's my thing. I didn't have an agent at the time, but I knew that that's what I needed. And I had the experience to, I wanted to cut out the noise. I wasn't, I'd already gained years of experience, and so the regional stuff was always good. I was able, even that took time as far as landing on working for Arena Stage and Ford's Theatre. That took time.
Right.
I moved,
That's very high class DC theater.
Yeah. It took time. But as far as New York was concerned, I definitely knew that I already had the experience. I had the resume to show, that I was at a certain levels. But to be seen, you definitely need an agent. And so that was my main goal. I wanted to get an agent. I was focused on that. So most of the auditions I was going for was really to try to acquire an agent,
right.
Mostly TV film agent as opposed to theater, because that was the transition for me. I wanted to transition more towards TV and film.
What was the reception like? If I'm going to guess, I would think, and I know how agents think, they think, okay, we got this guy who was Mufasa in London. Nice. And we want to put him on TV here, but they're probably thinking in their mind, does he understand the difference in the acting between TV and theater? Yeah. And listen, like even stars have a very hard time going back and forth between the two mediums.
Absolutely.
If you're someone who grew up in theater, like both you and I did, I always struggled with economizing my performance to the size of TV. Yeah. And I think when you're inherently built for theater, like you and I are, I mean, listen, I've got a loud voice. I got a booming voice. Filling up a theater was no problem with my voice. I have no problem being physically expressive, right? And to have to dial all that in when you're inside a box, and just, TV, they're like, walk up to this line, say this line, don't put any mustard on it, just keep it simple.
Right.
I mean, what was the reception like from the agents initially?
They were, I would say the agent that I ended up signing with, DDO, they were impressed with the resume, and I think they understood that, this is someone who has, I think, like you say, when you're coming from theater, it's hard to make that adjustment to camera, because everything feels really big and overly expressive. But again, I always had an understanding of what that was from that shift, that especially on camera, it can look kind of goofy if you're sort of, hey,
exactly,
and doing all of that stuff. So, I think for them, it was really the leap of faith, again, was based on the fact that, okay, he has a pretty deep resume. We're going to give him a shot. We're going to give him a chance. We're going to sign him. What they tend to do, and in my experience, I was being sent out to a lot of auditions for commercials.
Right.
And I think that's for a lot of actors who go to New York trying to get recognized or get into some sort of series, or, the commercials are always a great way to sort of get your feet into those spaces.
Yeah.
And, there's other things I think that also you start to learn that tends to play into it. For example, based on, there is so much inner workings within it. And that's why I tell a lot of actors, aspiring actors, it's never personal.
Yeah.
Sometimes some of these agents, bigger agents who are very connected with star actors, may have a deal with the production company to be like, look, if you give our up and coming actor a chance.
Totally. That's I don't think people understand that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I have friends who are at CAA,
Yeah.
William Morris, Endeavor.
Yeah.
That is the name of the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
They basically say you don't get Brad Pitt unless you take Bueka.
Yes.
In this movie.
Yes.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
That's how the deals are done. That's been going on in Hollywood forever.
Forever, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point you just mentioned. I think that's something for a lot of us, and it's not to. It doesn't. I think even bringing that point isn't a discouragement. I think some people might feel like, well, then I need to go to the biggest agent if I'm going to get a shot. I think what that does, in my experience, is it should motivate you to find your star power by being creative, by coming up with your own ideas,
Totally.
by being independent and creating your own heat, so that you're not relying on a big agent or big agency to spot you,
Right.
especially with the sort of access we have nowadays to like what we're doing right now with the podcast,
Right.
being able to be creative, finding your audience. And as long as you take that mindset, and this is what something I learned in the space, as long as you take the mindset of, even if one person is motivated by this work I'm doing, you're doing great. If one person is motivated enough to be like, to subscribe, to want to follow you, to want to know more about what you're doing, and are encouraged by what you're doing, I think that, to me, what I've learned, in my years of doing this, that for me resonates a lot more and means a lot more, because over time, as long as you stay consistent with that will continue.
Yeah,
to
and
build.
something you just brought up, and
Yeah.
this was a very common discussion that other actors that I knew in New York had.
Yeah.
It was always about you have to create your own work.
Yeah.
And it's not just for the sake of, I mean, I think as an artist, it's important to keep creating and keep doing what you love to do. Like, you got to do that. But in my opinion, the most powerful thing that you can do is show the industry exactly what you do.
Yeah.
And when I say, if you're listening to this and you don't know what that means exactly, to show the industry the exact type of role that you play,
Yes.
that what is inside your sweet spot.
Yes.
Because I would imagine if you're coming from England, from the UK to Broadway, to the New York situation, the agents are probably thinking, like, what is this guy's sweet spot in terms of roles? And because they're like, okay, Mufasa, but there's only one Mufasa. Like, that doesn't really translate to like Blue Bloods on CBS, right?
Yeah.
So like, where do we plug this guy in the industry that makes sense? And I think there is. This was a very common discussion I had with acting teachers and coaches in New York, and shout out to John Dapolito in New York. He actually runs a program called the Acting Niche, where he helps actors figure out exactly what types of roles they should pursue.
Nice.
And that's a really important thing, because you're not going to get cast unless you are inside of your energetic sweet spot.
Absolutely.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
If you are just a hair outside of your energetic sweet spot, you're not getting cast. And casting directors know it, and producers know it.
Yeah.
They can see that. So anytime, and also with TV and film, it's such a visual medium that you have to look the part to a T. You know, like when I was in New York, they would not let me do anything outside of bankers, you know, rich assholes on a yacht. You know, I mean, that was basically all they would let me do. Right. They're like, if he's not wearing a suit, we don't want him. Right. Like, that's all I did in New York, which, hey, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. But that was always, and listen, I could roll into those auditions, suit and tie on, and I would just milk that. You know, I would just completely milk that angle because I'm like, I'm just going to give the people what they want.
What they want. It's not hard. I'm going to give you what you
exactly.
What you
and half the time I would walk out, they're like, that's the guy, you know, because all these actors in New York were kind of like bohemian. And I remember one time, gosh, who's, I forget her name. She's been a casting director in New York for a million years. She said to me one day, I walk in and I'm wearing like a Burberry collared shirt. She looks at me, she goes, it looks literally like someone just plucked you off of Wall Street and brought you here. Right. And I said, well, you know, that's what I do. Yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, so tell me about the process. So your identity as an actor for many years now has been Mufasa. You're like literally the Lion King. So how did you find a new, what kind of roles were you going in for? What kind of roles were resonating for you as you were auditioning for TV, film, and in New York?
Great question. I remember years ago I read a book by Sidney Poitier, one of my favorite actors, who he wrote a book called Measure of a Man. And there's a quote in the book that I actually have on my website that says, acting isn't a game of pretend, it's an exercise in being real. And his story was so fascinating to me because as someone who also grew up in the islands, English, the American language wasn't necessarily his first, didn't come very natural to him because he had an accent, and he explains this in his book, that for him he looked at a lot of his experiences growing up, the way his dad was, as someone who was a man from the islands, but he was a provider. He was a caregiver. He was a disciplinarian, but he was firm in his ways, and he was a good dad. And so he in the book he kind of explains how taking a lot of his experiences and going into these audition rooms around the time that he was kind of coming up the ranks, it was around the whole black exploitation era. So there was a lot of movies that was kind of centered around, black individuals being portrayed a certain way as deadbeats, drunks, no good, criminals, all of this stuff. And so for him, he was offered roles, interesting, and Denzel actually mentions this too. He was offered roles that would have essentially, he said he had been offered a role to play this deadbeat dad who beats his wife, and he thought back to his own dad and was like, that's not my experience. That may have been someone else's experience, but that definitely wasn't mine. I remember my dad was like this. So he would turn down these roles. Yeah. Roles that at the time would have been paying very well.
Exactly.
While he was doing he said even around that time he was working at a hotel as a dishwasher, washing dishes. But he said he had enough integrity within himself and wanted to truly reflect that it wasn't enough to just take whatever was given. Right. And I think it was that part of him that really stood out in those audition rooms, where people realized this isn't someone who is going to say yes to the highest bidder or based off a check. Right. He's really looking for something that he can truly portray, that truly resonates with who he is as a person, his experiences. And that's something that really resonated with me. So to answer your question, I think I was really motivated by that. So I've been in a guest star in a few shows. And I've often had friends and families that are like, we've never seen you in a major lead on something major. as yet.
You're like, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's you know.
Sorry, I didn't beat out the other 500 actors.
Right. They're like, yeah, why is that? And I said, it's not because the opportunities weren't there.
Right.
I have gone through several auditions on different shows, and to me, the characters, though they would have been seasoned regulars, they would have had very prominent speaking roles, very prominent scenes where the character would have at least raised my profile,
right,
to a much bigger audience. I felt that, just like Sidney Poitier, just like Denzel Washington has said, if you can't look at yourself anything you do, you always have to make sure that you can look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of it.
Right.
That this is something I'm proud of. This is something I'm proud to show my son. This is something I'm proud to really, truly resonate, to say, this is it. This is who I am. And so for me, I had, shows that I auditioned for that expressed an interest that for me just didn't really resonate enough for me to feel like I'm willing to sacrifice or compromise at the very core of myself, portraying this image that did not resonate with who I am, or what I represented, or how I wanted to come across on screen. So so I think that was, in that sense, even just going through that groove, and that's interesting because that's a conversation with my agent and I would have, where initially they were sending me a bunch of stuff, and that was getting positive feedbacks, but I had to, express to them, look, this doesn't resonate with me.
And that's always a hard conversation
It is.
to have with an agent.
Yes.
Right? Because if it's a good agent, they'll respect that.
Yeah.
And they know that. Like every agent knows this. They've all had this conversation probably with every single person on their roster at some point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But a lot of actors don't understand that. They don't understand their own power, and they don't understand that you can have that conversation with your agent. And what you're describing really comes back to artistic integrity.
Yes.
And I hit that wall. Listen, I had a great time playing finance bros in film and TV. I thought that was a blast. I really enjoyed it. But I drew the line when they started wanting me to do white supremacist roles. Because I was like, sorry guys, I enjoyed, the white villain up until a point, but I'm not going down that route.
Right.
And so I remember having that conversation with my agent, and I was like, don't put me out for these white supremacist roles.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it can be a hard conversation to have with an agent, and it depends on your agent too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had this conversation with some agents who were fine with it. They were like, okay, I get it. Like, no problem.
Yeah.
And then other agents are going to be like, you take what I give you,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had those guys too.
Right.
And typically when you get that answer from an agent, you're like, this is probably not the right agent.
Yeah. It's definitely not the right agent at all.
Yeah.
You're exactly the same point. And I would say like this, more power to everyone's situation is different. Everyone's opportunities and how they receive it or how they process it is different. I think ultimately you always have to just be true to yourself. Like you say, you truly, have to be true to yourself because you're the one that's on camera. Mm-hmm. You're the one that's having to portray the scene, the role, the character. And if it really doesn't resonate with you, then I don't think you are really being sincere or genuine, or even respectful to the role and the character and the story. You're really shortchanging the audience if this is something. And I've had conversations with people where they say, well, as an actor, isn't that your job to just kind of, embody this and take on this role? And honestly, I think to some level of degree, our bodies are our vessels. Mm-hmm. Our bodies are vessels, and it's a temple. And, you just have to truly resonate. You have to be true to yourself.
Absolutely. Because this is a skin you're having to put on.
Yeah.
And really, the thing I would tell young actors is that, listen, you don't know what's going to happen with this TV show, this film, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's a TV show and it takes off, I mean, you're locked in for 10 years.
Yeah.
Doing that role.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So you better like it.
Yeah. You better like it. Yeah. I'm not going to say any names, but or bring up any shows specifically, but there's some shows that I felt that it's interesting because I had opportunities to be in some pretty big shows that were headlining at the time, and I look back now at some of the actors that were in those shows, very prominent roles, and just how what feels like the industry has essentially chewed them up. They are a shell of their former selves. They have had to give up too much.
Yeah.
They've had to compromise too much. They've been exploited to the point where they're unrecognizable, and now having to deal with certain traumas from sometimes the dark side of Hollywood, as they call it. So again, I look at the time, I think I'm grateful that I read a book like Measures of a Man, or I looked up to someone like a Sidney Poitier and a Denzel, and just some of these lessons that these men who I looked up to would say, as far as truly you really have to bring yourself in a sense of if it doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I strongly, and sadly that's where, the likes of some of these stories that's come out in Hollywood, with producers taking advantage of desperate actors and people that are fresh from college, fresh from uni, hoping for a break, hoping for a chance. I just want to encourage every aspiring young actor out there that it's okay to say no if you feel that the role you're being asked to read or perform doesn't truly resonate with you.
Yeah.
I think I and I'm speaking from experience as someone who was living in DC and commuting back and forth to New York where my agent was, getting on the boat bus, spending, thousands on travel back and forth till I landed my first major commercial, which actually, with Peloton, which was a real game changer as far as like helping me break into that the film scene, commercial scene in New York. But just knowing that I was able to decide on certain auditions I went for if this was something that was going to resonate with me.
Right.
And being very clear on that. Like, nope, this does not resonate with me. This resonates with me. And I think being able to define that is also part of how you figure out, you help your agents, as you say, you came from this particular role playing King Mufasa. Well, how I do believe you help your representations. You can steer them and guide them towards. You
have to have a clear idea of who you are, what you're doing. Otherwise, the industry will tell you. And that can be a bad path to go down.
Absolutely. It can. Absolutely.
Because whatever most perverse option they can think of, they will do it.
They will throw you in that. Yep.
So talk to me about, obviously you have a great history in this industry. What are you doing now? Obviously you're in Miami now.
Yes.
When I first found out there was an actor in Miami, I got very excited. I said, look, we have to meet up for coffee. I remember when we had a great conversation, as we are today. But that said, what's going on with your life now? What are you up to, and what brought you to Miami?
For me, I think after years in the East Coast, I was kind of tired of the cold.
Right.
I think a lot of people who have made that transition to Miami, I think it was around COVID. I just felt like things felt very difficult in the East Coast. A lot of theater shut down, which made it very challenging.
Talk to me about what happened to theater during COVID, and I'll tell you my experience too, because it got weird.
It was. I had actually, when we started hearing about COVID, I had actually just booked playing Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls,
Awesome.
at Ford's Theatre.
Awesome.
Yeah, so they wanted to do something interesting with it, and I landed the lead role on that. So we had been working very hard on that to really bring that to life, and I would say it's the greatest show you never got to see. It was really awesome, really an amazing work, and as we actually only ended up doing a dress run.
Yeah.
Before everything got shut down.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah,
That's so. I had a similar situation.
Yeah.
I was in a pilot TV show in LA. Loved the role. Yeah. I was playing this like total douche canoe DC lobbyist on this TV show, and it was hilarious. Great comedy, and same thing. COVID hit, shut down the whole thing.
Yeah.
But tell me about what happened with the Ford Theater production.
Yeah, it was Ford is a great space. They've always, it's as we know, it's a staple. It's been there through the Great Depressions and different things in the country, and so Christmas Carol, for example, which is another show that I was in, and I played Fred, the nephew Scrooge's Uncle Scrooge. I played the nephew Fred. Christmas Carol is a play that Ford has been running for years,
right?
Regardless of and COVID was actually one of the first times where we couldn't do it, and so the theatre decided to actually, in keeping up with the spirit of the tradition of the Christmas Carol, which represented beyond just the play, it was an opportunity for Ford's Theatre to donate. And bring awareness to certain causes in the city, which was great. It's a great way to really kind of bring the Christmas cheer and Christmas spirit and goodwill. So it was very unfortunate, even around that time when that happened. This is after Ford's Theatre, after Guys and Dolls. They decided to actually do a radio play of it. Have us as the actors do it as a radio play.
Oh, interesting.
Just to keep that. To keep it going. Even if we couldn't do it physically, they still gave us the opportunity to work, to earn a paycheck and again, another thing that was really nice, even around that time, something I thought was really nice that Ford's did because of COVID. I mean, they extended paying us as much as they could, as long as they could, during that time, knowing that this was something that, was essentially felt like an act of God. None of us was in control of it. So they did as best as they could to at least try to compensate us for the loss of earnings that we were going to experience in that time. And that's something I'm truly grateful for them for.
Yeah.
But yeah, COVID was tough, man. I mean, I think at first most people would say, oh man, I have all this time. But I think over time, just not being able to do anything, stuck at home.
Yeah.
So many restrictions. There was a lot of fear in the city, and New York was an interesting space because I think in big cities people tend to be very closed off, and I think what COVID did is it made people not only closed off but also afraid. So people were just there was just a level of coldness I felt in the city when I would go. That I just didn't like. Yeah, Guys and Dolls was very interesting. Playing it's a show that unfortunately due to COVID, was
never hit the stage.
It
was a weird time. It was definitely a really weird time. So talk to me. I know you have now. You have a new YouTube channel called Mr. Bueka.
Yes.
Talk to me about what's going on with that.
Yeah, Mr. Bueka. I would say I felt like it's been when I think about it, I say it's like a mandate. It's a vision that has been in my spirit. The Lord has put that vision in my spirit for over a decade. As someone who has been in education for a very long time, when I'm not on stage, I've had different opportunities to teach. I'm very passionate about working with kids. I feel like education should be free, should be equal and fair to all. Unfortunately, sometimes I think some people are in positions where financially they can't afford quality education. So I it's always been something that's been really heavy in my heart. And I finally was able to take the leap of faith when I moved here to start Mr. Bueka. I started it over a month ago, and Mr. Bueka is the name, as my name being Mr. Bueka. For me, it's based around the idea of, there's a scripture that talks of Proverbs 22, 1 and 6. And Proverbs 22:1 talks about a good name is more esteemed than riches, right? And having my name, putting my name behind something like this, I wanted people to get to know who I am and my motivations behind it. And Proverbs 22:6 says, raise a child in the way they should be, and when they get older, they won't depart from that good teaching, that good knowledge. So those are the main missions around Mr. Bueka. Mr. Bueka is it's an educational content that's focused on toddlers, preschoolers, right up to young learners, focusing on indoor and outdoor activities.
Cool.
Interesting sort of ways to learn. As I build out the channel, I have some very interesting ideas that I want to incorporate into things that I think sometimes in our school systems were never really applied. Actual practical lessons that I think even for children, it's important to start to incorporate those things into their studies. Things like time management. How to better understand time and make the use of time.
Yeah.
Financial responsibilities, what each, what the value of money really means, the golden rule, do unto others as you would to yourself. And I have a lot of great ideas that I'm going to be building into the channel through different means of stories and ways to teach these things that I think are very foundational and very important.
Yeah, so I think children's content on YouTube there's just a massive market and audience for that.
Yeah, that's right.
Very cool. That's very cool. Well, thank you so much, Bueka. This has been a really interesting conversation today. Loved hearing about your time in London and your travels to the United States. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating interview, and we'll drop all your info down below in the description of this YouTube channel so people can find your website and your YouTube channel.
Excellent. Well,
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.
All righty, you too.